Hey folks, MasakoX here. Now for the record, I was born in '86, so I can feel that I can relate to this video. I was born in the same year as Dragon Ball's televisual debut, so this also speaks to me. Yes, I am giving away my age, but that's what happens when you get older. You're okay to talk about your age. I'm 35, don't you know? But jokes aside, as millennials, both Haverock and I believe that what we're about to say might be a little bit sore, but something that we just had to get off of our chests. Bear with us, chums. Okay, so where does this all stem from, I hear you say? Well, it's all to do with the latest Dragon Ball Super movie coming out very soon, and the fact that there is a character which is about to have the most development happen to them that we've seen from them since the end of the Resurrection F Saga. And I mean, that really isn't a big yardstick when you think about it, in all honesty, but it had to be said. With Dragon Ball Super Superhero's Japanese premiere though, and that getting closer and closer, we figured that it was the right time in which to speak about one of its main characters. It's pretty interesting actually, because we hadn't really seen this character in the initial announcement of the movie. When we first saw that initial tech demo of Goku just swirling around, we'd assumed that it was going to be yet another movie about the guy, the main lead, since he was basically doing all of the action. And we've been conditioned to think that way for so very long. Oh, so very long. But we were wrong. You know, the more we see of it, the movie showcasings and trailers, I mean, the more that we're convinced that this character is going to be a very key player in what's to come. Not just for the movie, but for Dragon Ball going forward. You thought that Goten named Trunks' glow-up would be the biggest sea change for the franchise in recent history. Think again. Today, we want to talk about why it is important, what the character is important, and yes, that's a Gohan video for you. Rejoice! While Japanese audiences were introduced to Gohan as early as March 1988, Toyotaro and Tetsuro Kodama, who's the director of Dragon Ball Super Superhero, were, incidentally, around 10 years old at the time. The Western audiences had to wait a little bit longer, until most of the initial viewers of Dragon Ball Z ranged from about 10 to 12 years old themselves. But when we did get our first taste of Gohan, we were introduced to a character that quickly became the most relatable of any Saiyan-blooded protagonist from the series going. And it also helped that there was at least a trace of humanity in there thrown into the mix as well. For some of us in the West, we weren't that familiar with Goku yet, since we hadn't watched Dragon Ball since at the time it had extremely sporadic broadcast slots and times, and in the UK we didn't get it at all. And we saw this young kid as the main focus, being dragged into this very extreme and exciting adventure. It was pretty obvious that we were going to root for him first and foremost, especially since Gohan had avoided the fate of many child characters and wasn't an obnoxious jerk. He wasn't the overly grating persona that most main characters of cartoons were, and instead, he was very unsure of himself and quite timid, despite possessing this formidable power supposedly. In fact, you could say that those rage boosts that he had were like us when we had moments of just wanting to lash out. The fact that Gohan had those too, that was a big deal. Hence why a lot of people attached themselves to him at the time. Of course, you may wish to argue that in the early days of early Z, that instead of being timid and sensitive, Gohan was more like a crybaby, that he was just a useless character who didn't really amount to much and kept dodging. But come on, remember, he was like, what, 4? I'm pretty sure that most of you at that age were still crying when you fell over on your bum. I know I did. I whinged all the time when I was that age, and I'm not afraid to admit it. That being said, given how smart he was, thanks to the constant schooling from Chi-Chi mostly, Gohan was intellectually much closer to 10 years old rather than 4. To be completely honest. And maybe that's why we rooted for him so much. Despite his physical age being quite a bit lower than ours, he still had the demeanour that was similar to ours. Of course, when he hadn't had a boo-boo. Whoever you ask from the initial generations of the Dragon Ball Z fandom from the mid-90s, they were around 8 to 13 years old when they first saw Gohan, and that's no matter of the cultural background or gender. It's essentially universal. True, the show might have targeted that age with the utmost of intent, since it was one of the classic shonen anime of the time, even with all the violence happening around them, but age ratings were quite different all those years ago. And remember, in Japan, Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z were originally aired on a Wednesday evening. And even back in the day, here, I saw Dragon Ball on about like 5 o'clock. But the most important thing is that although young, Gohan didn't seem infantile to us. And we got to watch him grow up, just as we grew up. There was that shared journey. In the West, we weren't used to seeing characters actually aging up. Instead, they would be forever in the same period of time, the same period of their lives, even after years of syndication and broadcast. By the time we had grown up, they remained the same, and only nostalgia would keep us invested in the product, instead of that initial spark of connection and relatability. It's sad, but that's reality for you. That kind of stuff happens to us all. And while, as mentioned, we also witnessed Goku growing up in one way or another, I feel that Gohan's growth was more personable, you know? Goku did most of his growing up in the original series, and even then, it was less perceptible than Gohan's development, you know? His was more gradual. And besides, we didn't get a consistent run of the first series of Dragon Ball until about 2003, which by then we were well into the stage of life where watching anime was for chumps. I mean, unlike today, where you can pretty much watch anime throughout your adolescence, without too much derision from the general populace. Thank you, streaming platforms. Also, and this is another reason why Gohan is more relatable to us than the actual main character, Goku didn't have to do homework at all. Granted, he had his training with Roshi, but that is nothing in comparison to doing long division. Goku didn't, and has never had to, think about paying taxes or getting a real job. And yes, you could say that in Super he does have that food delivery service gig, that thing attached to the farming of the Son family, but that's more of a compromise with Chi-Chi instead of a genuine vocation. Goku didn't have any expectations set upon him by his parental figure. Grandpa Gohan took him in as a young boy, and when he became Uzaru Tojam, who was left to tell the kid what to do or what to aim for? Goku just existed and survived off of the land, to which he was pretty good at, I'll give you that. And also why I think he is smarter than you believe. Check this discussion out up top for more about that if you're interested. And as we are very much aware of, Goku had adventures and his own ambitions. Gohan, he had a lot of pressure on him, that boy. Not just from his mum. And whenever he genuinely showed glimpses of wanting to be a scholar, he does state that that is his real dream, by the way. We also knew he had huge potential in regards to strength, thanks to his Saiyan nature and heritage, of course. And we wanted that realised to the fullest as well. Needless to say, the latter didn't happen. Put simply, Toriyama wrote Gohan in a manner where if he didn't have to fight anybody, if he had the chance not to fight, Gohan would gladly take it, giving his rivals many chances to avoid conflict, even against Cell, or him vocalising his disapproval and disavowing his father's passion for fighting and martial arts. He still fought, but he only did it because he kinda had to, so as to not disappoint Goku or squander some chances to bond with his father. In reality, we were happy for Gohan to get a family and get a job. He really had a good life going for him. But him being constantly overshadowed by his own father and Vegeta, that didn't feel good. Granted, he was in a good place pragmatically, but he'd been genuinely relegated by the creator to that role after having given up on him. Not to the same extent as Chi-Chi, of course, but it's pretty close. Make Gohan a nerd and a bookworm, there you go, out of your hair. Now don't get us wrong, if that was Gohan's own decision to be like that, to drop the Saiyaman cape forever and just walk away from everything and live his own life, that would be fine with us. If there had been a solid line in the sand to which Gohan chose a side to stand in and commit to, that would be good enough. We would at least know where he stood. But the modern interpretations of the franchise, especially Resurrection F, dedicated its time to show how weak Gohan had become unnecessarily in comparison to other characters. Instead of being on one side of the line, Gohan was trying to straddle the line and constantly lost his balance. Not a good look. And that did not feel good to us either. Clearly, this was the character's lowest ebb. Again, nothing wrong with not wanting to fight anymore, but yeah, the movie and the corresponding saga decided to show us this character being humiliated. unnecessarily. Sure, he came up with a good plan to call his father and Vegeta by using up his remaining energy as a beacon, but that was really the best thing he did. Later on in Super, we were told that Gohan was constantly struggling to balance his work, his family, and martial arts. All of this really gratuitous. And that angered us quite a bit, because he had to juggle and struggle over and over again. It really enraged us, because we thought that those problems had already been remedied after the Resurrection F Saga, where Gohan had vowed to train more and help defend his family. You know, that sounded like a good balance to me. But 3 episodes later, "Oh, I'm sorry, I can't help you, but I've got a conference." Oh dear. So much for that then. Both Hav and I came to think about a different conclusion. It started to hurt us actually, because our boy that we had rooted for in our tweens and teens and heck into our 30s even, became like us, you know, failing to balance his hobbies, his family, his studies, his work, living in his father's shadow, being ridiculed by the older generations, Vegeta. And despite having a stable work and loving family, he still felt a little bit unfulfilled. That there was still more in the tank to tap into, but you weren't quite sure how that was going to come about in reality. Oh dear. It turns out that Gohan had suddenly become a millennial. Now before you start panicking or spitting feathers, let us explain that this is certainly not something that any of the creatives of Dragon Ball had planned for the character. But when you look at different definitions of what Generation Y is from around the world, and yes, they do vary, and us being European, we have slightly different definitions than you folks in the US might have. Heck, even myself and Hav have different regional specifics between the UK and Poland. The general consensus is that Gohan is definitely tech-savvy, and despite being shy, he can be very confident when in the right situation. He has to deal with a lot of stuff caused by his father. With Cell, it's not just emotional baggage being dealt with here, it becomes literal very quickly. He isn't that focused on wealth, and instead prefers to live his life well within his means, and he seems to be overly competent in what he is supposed to do. Of course, he doesn't tick all of the boxes of the millennial, but some of his issues lie so close to home that it's really hard to not make the comparison. It is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, yeah, but the longer you think about it, the more you realise that Gohan has sort of become a mirror character of us in aspects that we really didn't expect him to be. Yeah, he has gained something, but his potential as a child was so great that we were expecting him to do, well, more. Ooh, sound familiar? How many of us were those kids that peaked at a certain age and seemingly were never able to return to those points thereafter? How often did we have to deal with the expectations of others? It's kind of ironic, actually, that we also had those expectations for Gohan. And yes, we are talking about a fictional character that can turn his hair golden by yelling a lot, but you can use it as an allegory for so many things. This talent that you may have had as a kid, but you never got to expand upon after you reached a certain age or time in your life, when you had to find a more stable means of income and just to get by, and by the time you reach your late 20s and early 30s, you feel that it might be too late to return to those younger pursuits. Now you have a bit of time. This other path in life that you had a chance to take, you never got to do again. Or, you know, having just the general problem of balancing your everyday life. The struggle to be a good person in your family and community. Be successful at your job. Being a good friend. We have to deal with at least some of those issues on the daily. And that's why it hurts us so much to see our magical half-monkey boy deal with those problems as well, and fail. Because if our fictional characters aren't safe from the rigors of real life, then nobody is. While Toyotaro and Kodama may be on the edge of the Generation Xers by simple calculation, you can easily tell that they were growing up with Gohan, and that character might be very important to them. We already know about Toyotaro's passion for the character, and while it gets a little bit fanficky at times, especially during the Tournament of Power, there is no question that the artist formerly known as Toyball wants the son of Goku to succeed. So seeing how bleak the world can feel for him, it does seem very relevant to bring some hope for the character that so many of us find relatable, you know? It does feel great to know that maybe it's not too late for Gohan after all. Maybe it's not too late for you to do that thing that you'd left behind so many years ago. Maybe you can find that balance, and you might have people that can help you realize that. And hey, if people can root for Gohan making that triumphant return, maybe they can root for you too. Again, we don't think that any of the creatives fully understood the meaning that you could attribute to this character. But that's okay. That's just how culture works. Things often become symbols of certain aspects of life without any intention of being them when they were first made. In our meme-filled world, you don't know what will stick and will be remembered for eternity. But if you're having a bad day right now, or you're doubting yourself, or you think you're past your prime, don't worry. Maybe your superhero moment is right around the corner. Thank you for watching, folks, and we'll catch you later.